Texas, 1945. A group of American GIs stands outside a prisoner of war camp, watching German POWs play volleyball in the afternoon sun. The Germans are laughing, joking. Some have taken off their shirts, revealing bodies that are healthy, well-fed, tanned from working outdoors. One American soldier turns to his buddy. His face is hard. Angry. "My brother is in a German POW camp," he says quietly. "Last letter we got," he said, "they're eating potato peels. He's lost 60 pounds. He looks back at the Germans playing volleyball, at the POWs who are healthier now than when they arrived, who've gained weight, who eat 3 meals a day, who get paid for their work, who receive medical care, who write letters home, who attend movies on Saturday nights. This doesn't feel right," the soldier says. His buddy says nothing, because what can you say? They both know it's true. German prisoners in America are living better than American prisoners in Germany. It's not even close. Welcome to one of World War II's most uncomfortable truths. A story that was deliberately suppressed during the war. A reality that caused riots in American cities when people found out. A situation so absurd that German POWs themselves couldn't believe it. Over the next half hour you'll discover how nearly 400,000 German prisoners came to America, how they lived better than many American civilians during wartime rationing, how they gained an average of 15 to 20 pounds, with some gaining 50 or more, how they worked on farms, in factories and on military bases, while being paid for their labor, how they received better medical care than they'd had in the German military. And you'll learn what was happening simultaneously to American POWs in Germany. The starvation, the disease, the death marches, the 95-pound men who could barely walk, the mortality rate that was 40 times higher than for German POWs in America. This is the story of the greatest disparity in prisoner treatment in modern warfare. A story that reveals uncomfortable truths about the Geneva Convention, about political calculations during war, and about the price America paid for taking the moral high ground. Let's start with how nearly 400,000 German soldiers ended up in POW camps across the United States, because this wasn't the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. November 1942. Operation Torch. Allied forces invade North Africa, engaging German and Italian troops under Rommel's command. The battles are fierce. The Allied forces are green in experience, but they have one massive advantage: numbers. As the fighting intensifies, Allied forces begin capturing German soldiers by the thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The sheer volume of prisoners creates an immediate crisis. Where do you put them? Britain is already overcrowded with POWs. The island nation doesn't have space or resources for more. North Africa doesn't have secure facilities. Shipping prisoners back to British camps in the Middle East is expensive and logistically complex. So American military planners make a decision that will change everything. Ship them to the United States. The advantages are obvious. America has vast space, resources, distance from the fighting. Escaped prisoners can't rejoin German forces when they're 3,000 miles across an ocean. And perhaps most importantly, America needs labor. By 1943, millions of American men are overseas fighting. Farms are desperate for workers. Factories need hands. Military bases require maintenance crews. German POWs can fill these gaps. The first German prisoners arrive in America. They're loaded onto transport ships, given life jackets, and sent across the Atlantic. Many expect to be executed upon arrival. Nazi propaganda has taught them that Americans are barbaric, that they torture prisoners, that surrender means death. The reality is completely different. When the ships dock at American ports, German POWs are processed through reception centers. They're given medical examinations, deloused, issued clean uniforms, fed hot meals. Many are shocked. Some think it's a trick, a propaganda stunt before the real treatment begins. It's not a trick, it's the Geneva Convention in action, and America is following it to the letter. The Geneva Convention of 1929 established rules for POW treatment, Prisoners must be housed in conditions similar to the capturing nation's troops. They must receive adequate food, medical care, and shelter. They cannot be forced to do military work. They must be paid for labor. They can write letters home. They have rights to recreation and religious services. America signed the Geneva Convention. Germany signed it too. Both nations promised to follow these rules. Here's what happened. America followed the rules. Germany didn't. By mid-1943, German POWs are being distributed to camps across America, over 500 camps in 46 states, from Texas to Montana, from Georgia to Washington, massive compounds housing thousands, smaller branch camps housing hundreds. The camps are built quickly, barrack-style buildings with heating, mess halls, recreation areas, medical facilities, fencing with watchtowers, everything required by the Geneva Convention. Inside these camps, German POWs begin experiencing something many have never known: abundance. 3 meals a day, every day, the same rations American soldiers receive. Breakfast might be oatmeal, eggs, toast, coffee. Lunch could be sandwiches, soup, fruit. Dinner often included meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread, dessert. For soldiers who'd been eating whatever they could scrounge in North Africa or on the Eastern Front, this was unbelievable. For POWs captured late in the war, when Germany was facing severe food shortages, it was like arriving in paradise. A German POW named Hans Schmidt, captured in Tunisia in 1943, later wrote about his first week in an American camp. "I couldn't believe the food: real coffee, fresh bread, meat every day. I thought there must be a mistake, that this food was meant for the guards, not us." After 5 days of eating like this, I asked when the rations would be reduced to normal POW levels. The American sergeant laughed. He said, "This is normal. This is how we feed everyone." Schmidt gained 12 pounds in his first month. He wasn't alone. Medical records from POW camps show a consistent pattern. German prisoners arrived malnourished and left healthy. The average weight gain was 15 to 20 pounds during captivity, but many gained far more. POWs who'd been on the Eastern Front, where food had been scarce even for German soldiers, often arrived severely underweight. These men could gain 30, 40, even 50 pounds during their imprisonment. One POW captured in 1944 weighing 35 pounds, left in 1946 weighing 80. He'd gained 50 pounds in a prison camp during a war. But it wasn't just the quantity of food, it was the quality, the consistency, the fact that it never stopped coming. German soldiers, even when winning, had dealt with supply line issues. Food was irregular. Quality varied. On the Eastern Front, many survived on whatever they could confiscate from occupied territories. In American camps, meals arrived like clockwork, 3 times a day, every day. No exceptions. The food wasn't gourmet, but it was reliable, nutritious, and plentiful. Camp kitchens were often run by German POW cooks who'd been professional chefs before the war. They used American ingredients to create German-style meals. Schnitzel made with American pork, sauerkraut made with American cabbage, beer, non-alcoholic during the war, but still a comfort. POWs in some camps even grew their own vegetables. They were allowed garden plots. They grew potatoes, carrots, onions, tomatoes, fresh produce to supplement their rations. Compare this to what American POWs in Germany were experiencing. Germany's POW camps varied dramatically, depending on who ran them. Camps run by the Wehrmacht, regular German army, generally followed Geneva Convention guidelines, especially early in the war. American POWs in these camps received adequate food, though never abundant. But as the war progressed and Germany faced increasing shortages, conditions deteriorated. By 1944-1945, even Wehrmacht-run camps were providing insufficient rations. Red Cross parcels became essential for survival. Then there were camps run by the SS or used for specific prisoner categories. These were nightmares. Stalag 9B, Bad Orb. Stalag Wurf B, Mühlberg. Berger concentration camp, where American POWs were sent for forced labor. These places weren't even pretending to follow the Geneva Convention. American POWs in these camps received starvation rations, watery soup, a slice of black bread, occasional potato peels, maybe 1,000 calories per, when they needed 3,000 to maintain body weight. Men lost 50, 60, 70 pounds. They developed scurvy from lack of vitamins, dysentery from contaminated water, tuberculosis from crowded, unheated barracks. Their teeth fell out, their hair fell out. Their bodies consumed their own muscle for fuel. Red Cross parcels were supposed to supplement these rations. The parcels contained chocolate, cigarettes, canned meat, crackers, cheese, coffee. They were lifesavers, literally, but Germany often withheld these parcels, or allowed only partial distribution, or confiscated them entirely. The guards would steal them. The SS would use them as bribes. They'd arrive at camps, but never reach the prisoner. American POWs who survived German camps consistently report the same thing. They were always hungry, constantly, desperately, painfully hungry. Hunger dominated every thought. Men fantasized about food. They talked about meals they'd eaten before the war. They planned elaborate menus for restaurants they'd open after liberation. Food was everything. Meanwhile, in America, German POWs were gaining weight. Let's talk about the work programs, because German POWs in America weren't just sitting around getting fat. They were working and being paid for it. Under the Geneva Convention, POWs can be required to work, but not on military projects. They must be paid. The work cannot be dangerous or humiliating. Officers cannot be forced to work, only enlisted men. America needed labor desperately. Millions of American men were overseas. Agriculture was especially hard hit. Crops were rotting in fields because there weren't enough workers to harvest them. German POWs filled this gap. Starting in 1943, POWs were organized into work details. They picked cotton in Texas, harvested wheat in Kansas, cut timber in Oregon, worked in canneries in California, maintained military bases across the country. The farmers and businesses who used POW labor paid the US government, which then paid the POWs. The rate was 80 cents per day, the same as American privates earned. POWs could use this money to buy items at camp canteens: cigarettes, candy, toiletries, beer after the war ended. For many German POWs, this was the best job they'd ever had. Farm work was hard, but straightforward. The hours were regular. The conditions were decent. The pay was actual money they could spend. Some POWs became so valued by farmers that the farmers requested the same prisoners return each season. Relationships developed. Farmers would bring extra food for their POW crews. Some invited POWs into their homes for holiday meals. This caused its own problems. Americans whose sons were fighting Germans overseas didn't appreciate seeing German POWs being treated like honored guests at Thanksgiving dinner. There were incidents. In some towns, locals protested POW camps. They didn't want Germans in their communities, even as prisoners. When they saw how well the POWs were being treated, tensions increased. In other places, especially rural areas desperate for labor, German POWs were welcomed. They were polite, hard-working. Many spoke English. They were white Europeans who, apart from the whole Nazi thing, weren't that different from the local population. This racial dynamic was ugly but undeniable. German POWs who were white were often treated better than black American soldiers. There are documented incidents of German POWs being allowed to eat in restaurants that refused to serve black GIs. Of POWs staying in hotels where black soldiers were turned away. This didn't go unnoticed. Black newspapers covered these incidents extensively. The contrast was stark and infuriating. Enemy prisoners receiving better treatment than American citizens who'd volunteered to fight. But the work programs continued. They were too valuable to stop. By 1945, German POWs were essential to American agriculture and industry. Over 400,000 prisoners working across the country, producing millions of dollars worth of labor. And they were still gaining weight. Let's talk about recreation. Because German POWs in America weren't just eating and working, they had leisure time, entertainment, activity. Camp commanders took the Geneva Convention's recreation requirements seriously. POWs were allowed to play sports. Most camps had soccer fields, volleyball courts, boxing rings. Inter-camp tournaments were organized. Libraries were established. POWs could check out books in German. Many camps offered educational classes, English language, mathematics, history, vocational skills. Some POWs earned college credit through correspondence courses with American universities. Music was huge. German POWs formed orchestras, bands, choirs. They gave concerts in camps. Some camps had theaters where POWs performed plays. They built sets, made costumes, rehearsed productions of German classics. Art programs existed in many camps. POWs created paintings, sculptures, crafts. Some of this artwork was sold, with proceeds going to the POW Welfare Fund. Examples of POW artwork still exist in museums and private collections. On Saturday nights, many camps showed movies, Hollywood films, newsreels, documentaries. The films were screened to multiple purposes: entertainment, but also subtle anti-Nazi propaganda. Films showing the liberation of concentration camps were mandatory viewing for all POWs. Religious services were held regularly. Catholic masses, Protestant services, even Jewish services in some camps, though few German POWs admitted to being Jewish. Chaplains visited camps. Prisoners could attend services, pray, practice their faith. Mail was allowed. POWs could write letters home, censored, but permitted. They could receive letters and packages. The Red Cross facilitated this correspondence. For many POWs, these letters were their only connection to families in Germany. Some camps even published newspapers. Written by POWs for POWs in German, they included news, poetry, essays, artwork. These newspapers had to be approved by American censors, but they gave POWs a creative outlet and connection to German culture. Compare this again to American POWs in Germany. Recreation in German camps was minimal. Soccer might be allowed if prisoners could fashion a ball from rags. Books were rare. Mail was severely restricted. Many American POWs went months without receiving letters, even when mail was being sent. Entertainment didn't exist in most camps. Men sat in barracks, too weak from hunger to do much else. They told stories. They sang songs. They tried to keep their minds occupied. But there were no orchestras, no theaters, no art programs. The contrast was staggering. German POWs in America were attending concerts and college classes. American POWs in Germany were trying not to starve. Now let's address the obvious question: why? Why did America treat German POWs so well when Germany was treating American POWs so poorly? Several reasons, some noble, some practical, none entirely satisfying. First, the Geneva Convention. America had signed it. American leadership believed in following international law, even when the enemy didn't. This was moral high ground positioning. America wanted to demonstrate that it was better than Nazi Germany, that it respected human rights even in war. Second, reciprocity concerns. American officials hoped that by treating German POWs well, Germany might treat American POWs better. This logic was flawed. Germany wasn't going to change its behavior based on American treatment of POWs, but the hope persisted. Third, propaganda value. America wanted to show the world, especially neutral nations, that it was a civilized country that treated even enemies humanely. This was particularly important for post-war planning. America needed to maintain moral authority. Fourth, practical consideration. Well-fed, healthy POWs could work more effectively. Sick, starving prisoners required medical care and couldn't labor. From a cold economic perspective, keeping POWs healthy maximized their value. Fifth, denazification goal. American officials hoped that treating German POWs well might help denazify them. If POWs saw that Americans were decent people, not the monsters Nazi propaganda portrayed, maybe they'd reject Nazi ideology. Some re-education programs were implemented in camps with this goal. Did it work? Partially. Many German POWs did have their perspectives changed by their American experience. They saw that Americans weren't evil, that democracy could function, that people could live without fascism. Some POWs returned to Germany after the war with more moderate views, but others remained committed Nazis. Hardcore prisoners ran their own camps within camps, enforcing Nazi ideology among fellow POWs, punishing those who cooperated too much with Americans. There were murders in POW camps, Germans killing other Germans for being traitors. The denazification effort had mixed results at best. Meanwhile, American POWs in Germany weren't being treated well. No matter how well America treated German POWs, the reciprocity argument failed completely. By 1945, as the war entered its final months, the disparity in POWs' treatment became impossible to hide. Germany was collapsing. The Eastern Front was moving west as Soviet forces advanced. The Western Front was moving east as Allied forces pushed into Germany. The Reich was being crushed from both sides. In this chaos, German POW camps descended into nightmare scenarios. The death marches began. As Soviet forces approached camps in the east, German authorities forced POWs to march west. These marches occurred in winter, through snow with minimal food, inadequate clothing, no medical care. Men died by the thousands, shot if they couldn't keep up, frozen if they fell behind, starved because no supplies existed. The death marches of 1945 killed more American POWs than had died in camps. Up to that point, approximately 23,000 American POWs were held in Germany during World War II. About 1 in 50 died in captivity, a death rate around 2. This might not sound terrible until you realize, for German POWs in America the death rate was less than 0.6%. About 1 in 2,000. German POWs in America were 40 times less likely to die than American POWs in Germany. Let that sink in. If you were captured by America, you'd probably gain weight, learn English, maybe take some college courses, and go home healthy. If you were captured by Germany, you'd probably survive, but barely, and you might die in the final chaos of the war. When American POWs were finally liberated in spring 1945, the photographs shocked the nation. Men weighing 95 pounds, skeletons in uniforms, soldiers who'd been 180 pounds when captured now 90 pounds, unable to walk without assistance, teeth missing, hair falling out, bodies ravaged by starvation and disease. These images were published in newspapers across America. The contrast between these starving American soldiers and the healthy German POWs in American camps was obvious and infuriating. Public outrage exploded. Why are we feeding Germans 3 meals a day when they starved our boys? Why are German prisoners healthy when our soldiers are dying? Why are we following the Geneva Convention when Germany ignored it? There were calls to reduce rations for German POWs, to end the work program, to make their imprisonment harsher, to treat them as they'd treated American POWs. The Truman administration, Roosevelt died in April 1945, faced a political nightmare. They couldn't justify the disparity to an angry public, but they also couldn't violate the Geneva Convention without abandoning America's moral position. The compromise was subtle but significant. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, German POWs' status changed. They were no longer prisoners of war protected by the Geneva Convention. They became disarmed enemy forces. This reclassification allowed for reduced rations. The 3 meals a day standard dropped to minimum caloric requirements. The cushy treatment ended. Not abruptly. America still provided adequate food and care, but the abundance stopped. German POWs noticed. Meals became smaller. Less meat, more bread and potatoes. Luxuries disappeared. the weight gain stopped, but even reduced rations in American camps were better than what most Germans were experiencing in defeated Germany. The country was devastated, cities were ruins, food was scarce, the economy had collapsed. Repatriation of German POWs began in 1946. It was a massive logistical operation. Hundreds of thousands of men needed to be transported back to Europe. Ships that had brought American soldiers home now carried German POWs back. Many POWs didn't want to leave. Some had developed relationships with Americans. Some feared what awaited them in destroyed Germany. Some preferred American captivity to German freedom. A significant number of German POWs requested permission to immigrate to America after the war. Some succeeded. They returned to the farms where they'd worked, the communities where they'd lived as prisoners. They became American citizens. This created its own controversy. Americans who'd fought Germans now lived next door to former German soldiers. Sometimes these relationships were fine, sometimes they weren't. But thousands of German POWs did successfully integrate into American society. They married American women, raised families, became farmers, mechanics, teachers. Within a generation, their German POW past became just another immigrant story. Meanwhile, American POWs who'd survived German camps came home traumatized. Many suffered what we'd now call PTSD. They struggled with survivor's guilt, with anger at how German POWs had been treated in America, with bitterness that they'd starved while their enemies had thrived. Veterans organizations pushed for recognition of what American POWs had endured, for compensation, for acknowledgement that their treatment had violated the Geneva Convention, and that Germany should be held accountable. The Nuremberg trials addressed many German war crimes, but didn't specifically focus on POW treatment. This frustrated many veterans who felt their suffering was being overlooked in favor of other atrocities. It would take decades for American POW experiences in Germany to receive proper historical attention. Books were written, documentaries made, memorials built, but the recognition came slowly. Let's address some common misconceptions about this topic. Misconception 1. All German POWs in America lived in luxury. Not true. Conditions varied by camp. Some camps were well run with good facilities. Others were overcrowded, poorly maintained, harsh. Location mattered. Camps in Texas summer heat or Montana winter cold presented different challenges. Treatment depended on camp commanders' attitudes. But even the worst American POW camps provided adequate food, shelter, and medical care. They met Geneva Convention minimums. This was still far better than most American POWs received in Germany. Misconception 2. All American POWs in Germany were starved and abused. Not accurate. Treatment varied dramatically. POWs captured early in the war and held in Wehrmacht-run camps generally received decent treatment. Officers in OFLAG camps often had better conditions than enlisted men. Location mattered. Camps in Germany itself usually had more resources than camps in Poland or occupied territories. But by 1944-1945, even well-run German camps couldn't provide adequate food. Germany was starving. The civilian population was starving. POWs received what little could be spared, which wasn't much. Misconception 3. America treated German POWs well because they were white. Partially true, but oversimplified. Yes, racial attitudes influenced treatment. German POWs benefited from being European and white. This is undeniable and shameful. But the primary driver was the Geneva Convention. America treated German POWs well because it had committed to following international law. The racial component affected how individual Americans interacted with POWs socially, but the policy-level treatment was driven by legal obligations. This doesn't excuse the racial disparity in how German POWs were treated versus how Black American soldiers were treated. That disparity was real, documented, and indefensible. Misconception 4. German POWs gained weight. because they were lazy and just ate American food. False. German POWs worked hard, long hours in fields, forests, factories. The weight gain came from consistent, adequate nutrition combined with the absence of combat stress, disease, and the chaos of war. When humans receive proper nutrition and aren't being shot at, they gain healthy weight. This is normal human physiology. The real question isn't why German POWs gained weight. It's why American POWs lost so much weight. And the answer is deliberate German policy to provide inadequate rations. Now let's talk about the long-term impact of this disparity. For German-American relations, the paradox was significant. Many Germans who'd been POWs in America became strong advocates for US-German friendship after the war. They'd seen America at its best. They'd been treated humanely when they expected brutality. This created a foundation of goodwill. Some historians argue that German POWs' positive experiences in America contributed to West Germany's strong alignment with the United States during the Cold War. Men who'd been prisoners became politicians, businessmen, community leaders, and they remembered how America had treated them. For American POWs, the legacy was more complicated. Many struggled with the fact that their enemies had been treated better than they'd been treated. This created lasting bitterness. POW advocacy groups worked for decades to get recognition and compensation. The disparity also informed future American military policy. When American soldiers were captured in Korea, then Vietnam, then Iraq, the Pentagon was acutely aware of how POWs on both sides would be treated. The lessons of World War II shaped how America approached prisoner issues in later conflicts. For international law, the World War II POW experience demonstrated both the potential and limitations of the Geneva Convention. America's adherence showed that the convention could work. Germany's violations showed that without enforcement mechanisms, it was just paper. This led to revisions after the war. The Third Geneva Convention of 1949 strengthened POW protections and clarified obligations. It addressed some loopholes Germany had exploited, but it still relied on voluntary compliance. Let me share some specific stories that illustrate the disparity. George Gärtner was a German POW who escaped from a camp in New Mexico in 1945. He disappeared into America, assumed a false identity, and lived secretly for 40 years. He worked construction in California, married, had a normal life. In 1985, he finally revealed his identity, his reason. I wanted to die an honest man. When asked why he'd stayed in America illegally, rather than return to Germany, Gärtner was blunt. I was treated better as a prisoner in America than as a soldier in Germany. Why would I leave? He served no prison time for his decades as a fugitive. He became an American citizen. His story was turned into a book and movie. He died in 2009, an American. Compare that to Kenneth Simmons, an American POW captured after his B-17 was shot down in 1944. He spent 11 months in Stalag Luft III, the camp famous for the Great Escape. Simmons survived on Red Cross parcels and watery soup. He lost 65 pounds. He watched men die of disease, starvation, and cold. When his camp was liberated in 1945, he weighed 98 pounds. He returned to America, married, had children, worked as an engineer, but he had nightmares about the camp for the rest of his life. He couldn't stand being hungry. Even decades later, he'd hoard food, unable to shake the fear of starvation. When he learned that German POWs in America had gained weight, that they'd been well fed and paid for labor, he struggled with rage. We followed the rules, he said in an interview in the 1990s. We treated their prisoners like human beings. They let us starve. And we still treated their prisoners well. I understand why we did it, but it still makes me angry. Simmons died in 2003. He never fully recovered from his POW experience. Or consider the case of Kurt Rossmeisel, a German soldier captured in North Africa in 19. He was sent to a POW camp in Louisiana. He worked on a sugarcane plantation. He learned English. He fell in love with his guard's sister. When the war ended, Ross Meisel was repatriated to Germany, but he immediately began working on immigration papers. In 1950, he returned to Louisiana. He married the woman he'd met during his captivity. He became a farmer. He raised a family. In interviews later in life, Ross Meisel was candid about his experience. "I was better fed as a prisoner in America than as a soldier in the German army. I was treated with more respect by American guards than by German officers. When I had to choose between going back to destroyed Germany or trying to stay in America, it was an easy choice." His story isn't unique. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of German POWs chose to immigrate to America after the war, drawn by the memory of how they'd been treated during captivity. Now contrast this with the experience of American POWs trying to get Germany to acknowledge what they'd suffered. It took until the 1990s for Germany to formally acknowledge systematic mistreatment of American POWs. Individual cases were acknowledged earlier, but broad recognition came slowly, compensation came even slower, and only for specific categories of victim. Many American POWs died before receiving any acknowledgement. Their families continued advocacy efforts. Books were written, documentaries produced, memorials, but compared to the swift integration of German POWs into American society, the recognition of American POWs' suffering was delayed and inadequate. This disparity continues to generate controversy among historians and veterans groups today. Let's talk about the numbers one more time because they tell the story starkly. German POWs in America. Approximately 380,000 prisoners. Death rate 0.05%, about 90 deaths. Average weight gain 15 to 20 pounds. Paid for labor 80 cents per day. 3 meals per day throughout captivity. Recreation and education programs. Regular mail privileges. Medical care equivalent to American soldiers. American POWs in Germany higher for those on death marches. Average weight loss 40–60 pounds. No payment for labor, violation of Geneva Convention. Starvation rations. Dependent on Red Cross parcels. Minimal recreation or education. Restricted mail, often withheld. Inadequate medical care, widespread disease. The numbers don't lie. Being a German POW in America was vastly better than being an American POW in Germany. Some argue this disparity shouldn't be surprising. America was wealthy, distant from the fighting, with abundant resources. Germany was being bombed, invaded, economically strangled. Of course, American camps had more resources, but this explanation only goes so far. Germany deliberately violated the Geneva Convention. They withheld Red Cross parcels. They forced POWs on death marches. They used starvation as a weapon. These weren't just resource shortages. These were policy decisions. America made different policy decisions. To follow international law, to treat prisoners humanely, to maintain moral authority. These decisions cost money and resources during wartime. They were controversial, but they were made consciously. As we wrap up this story, let's consider what it all means. The disparity in POW treatment during World War II reveals uncomfortable truths about warfare, international law, and moral choices during conflict. Truth 1. Following rules during war is expensive. America spent enormous resources feeding, housing, and guarding German POWs. These resources could have gone to American soldiers. The public questioned whether this was the right choice, but America maintained that upholding the Geneva Convention was worth the cost. Truth 2. Moral high ground has value, but not always immediately. America's treatment of German POWs didn't convince Germany to treat American POWs better. The hoped-for reciprocity didn't materialize. But post-war, America's adherence to international law strengthened its moral authority. This had long-term diplomatic benefits. Truth 3. War brings out both the best and worst in nations. America's treatment of German POWs represented American values at their best: respect for human rights, adherence to law, basic decency, but the racial disparities in how German POWs versus Black American soldiers were treated represented America at its worst. Truth 4. The experience of captivity shapes people forever. German POWs who were treated well became advocates for America. American POWs who were starved carried trauma for life. How we treat people, even enemies, has lasting consequences. Truth 5. International law only works when nations choose to follow it. The Geneva Convention couldn't force Germany to treat POWs humanely. It could only create standards that ethical nations chose to uphold. America chose to uphold them, Germany chose not to. The difference was choice, not law. What should we take away from this history? For some, the lesson is that America was foolish, that treating enemies well when they're treating your soldiers poorly is naive, that war requires pragmatism, not idealism, that the Geneva Convention is aspirational nonsense. For others, the lesson is that America did the right thing, that maintaining moral standards, even when enemies don't, is what separates civilization from barbarism, that treating prisoners humanely is never wrong, regardless of what enemies do. Both perspectives have merit, and both miss something important. The real lesson is that choices matter. Germany chose to starve American POWs. America chose to feed German POWs. Both nations faced resource constraints, political pressure, public anger, but they made different choices. Those choices reveal character, not just of governments, but of societies. What a nation does with prisoners, helpless people entirely at their mercy, reveals its values more than any propaganda or rhetoric. America's choice to treat German POWs well, even as American POWs starved, was costly and controversial. It generated public anger. It seemed unfair. It didn't achieve the hoped-for reciprocity, but it did something else. It demonstrated that America could maintain its principles even under pressure, that American values weren't just words, that the nation could be trusted to follow rules even when it was inconvenient. This trust became foundation for the post-war order, for NATO, for the Marshall Plan, for West Germany's integration into the Western Alliance, for America's role as leader of the free world. Would any of this have been possible if America had treated German POWs as Germany treated American POWs? Probably not. The moral authority to rebuild and lead post-war came partly from how America had conducted itself during the war, but that's cold comfort to American POWs who starved while German POWs gained 50 pounds. Kenneth Simmons, the B-17 pilot who lost 65 pounds in a German POW camp, put it this way in a 1995 interview: "I understand intellectually why we treated German prisoners well. I understand the arguments about international law and moral authority. I understand that maintaining our principles was important for the long term. I understand all of that. But I also remember being 98 pounds. I remember men dying of starvation. I remember German guards eating while we went hungry. And then I came home and learned that German prisoners here were healthy and well fed. And I'm still angry. I'll probably be angry until the day I die, not at the policy. I understand the policy, but at the unfairness of it, at the fact that we suffered because their country violated rules that our country followed. I'm proud that America took the high road, but I wish the high road hadn't meant that American POWs paid the price for German violation." That ambivalence, pride in American principles alongside anger at the disparity, captures the complexity of this history. Nearly 80 years later, the story of German POWs gaining 50 pounds in America while American POWs starved in Germany remains powerful. It's taught in military schools as a case study in the Geneva Convention. It's debated in ethics classes as an example of moral choices during war. It's referenced in discussions about international law and its effectiveness. But it's also personal. It's individual stories. George Gaertner living secretly in America for 40 years because he preferred American captivity to German freedom. Kurt Rossmeisel returning to Louisiana to marry the woman he met while a prisoner. Kenneth Simmons carrying trauma from starvation for the rest of his life. These stories remind us that history is made of individual human experiences. Statistics and policies matter, but behind them are real people whose lives were shaped by the choices nations made. The choice to treat enemies humanely, even when they don't reciprocate, is difficult. It feels unfair. It generates political opposition. It's expensive and controversial. But it's also defining. It reveals character. It sets precedents. It shapes how future generations view the past. German POWs gained 50 pounds in America, while American POWs starved in Germany. This disparity was real, documented and significant. It made people angry then. It makes people uncomfortable now. But it also demonstrated something important about the nation America aspired to be. A nation that follows its principles even when it's hard, even when enemies don't reciprocate, even when the public questions the decision, whether that aspiration was noble or naive, whether the cost was worth the benefit, whether maintaining moral authority justified the suffering of American POWs. These questions don't have simple answers. What's undeniable is that choices were made, and those choices had consequences that echo to this day. German POWs remembered being treated well by America. Many became Americans. Many became advocates for American values. The seeds of post-war German-American friendship were planted in POW camps across the United States. American POWs remembered being starved by Germany. They carried trauma. They struggled with anger. But they also remembered that their own country had maintained its principles even when the enemy didn't. Both legacies matter, both are part of the story. And the story reminds us that how we treat people, even enemies, even under the worst circumstances, defines who we are far more than any declaration or propaganda. German POWs gained 50 pounds in America, while American POWs starved in Germany. This isn't just a historical fact, it's a lesson about choices, consequences, and the price of maintaining principles in a world that doesn't always reward them. The lesson remains relevant, because every generation faces similar questions. How do we treat enemies? Do we maintain our principles when others don't? Is moral authority worth the cost? Do our values matter even when they seem unfair? The World War II POW experience doesn't answer these questions definitively, but it shows us what happened when America chose one path and Germany chose another. And it reminds us that those choices, made 80 years ago, still shape the world we live in today.